This is an original 7-minute story for kids called The Tooth Trap by me. This is part 10 of our weekly bedtime story series. It's our special project to help your family enjoy reading together every day. You can find all of our stories on our website, and we have a new one every week. This week's story is great for ages 5 to 8. Parents, we recommend reading at about this level. This showbox used to belong to her cousin Mary, and it was absolutely huge.
Ho, ho, ho!
If fairies liked sitting in pools, why didn't she see them playing in puddles during the rain? No, fairies didn't like water. Every time the Tooth Fairy stepped into the room, the string would pull on the domino, knocking them over and making the showbox thump loudly. Just before she drifted off, she glanced at the glittering path one last time. Yes, there was a tiny new sparkle. And this time it looked like a footprint.
Ho, ho, ho!
A barefoot footprint, and those had to belong to a barefoot fairy. With that, Harper was fast asleep. These footprints belonged to the Tooth Fairy. They were real. They had to be. Slowly, Harper stood up and followed them. Wings that shimmer like a dragonfly's, laugh that sounds like tiny bells, a love for all creatures great and small. The Tooth Fairy had left a message. And what a message it was! Harper couldn't believe it. The Tooth Fairy was real.
Ho, ho, ho!
And she was everything Harper had hoped she would be. Looking around her room, Harper saw the magic everywhere. There were dragonflies by the window, tiny bells on the curtain rod, and a showbox with a pool. Harper knew that if she believed hard enough, magic would happen again. My heart soared at the thought of you, my little friend. Until we meet again, your Tooth Fairy, Trixie.
Ho, ho, ho!
The footprints ended at her bedside table, and there was a surprise waiting for her. The tooth was gone. In its place was a folded piece of paper and a shiny silver dollar. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Don't forget to share your thoughts and comments below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. See you next time. But it wasn't just any dollar. The ink shimmered like liquid silver, and it was tied with a tiny red ribbon.
Ho, ho, ho!
Wondering if she should read it, she picked it up and unfolded the note. Finally, Harper was ready. She wriggled into bed without waking up her parents. And even though she was snuggled under a blanket, she kept one eye open. And from under the covers, she watched as the moonlight poured into her room. It fell right onto the glittery trail that led to the showbox. She saw tiny shadows dancing along the path. Could it be? But no.
Ho, ho, ho!
It was only her goldfish, Bubbles, who was leaping out of the tank to say hello. And a pool was actually the worst place to put a seat. What if the Tooth Fairy splashed herself while relaxing? Of course not. That wasn't relaxing at all. So she removed the pool. That's when Harper had her grand idea. Perfect. At first, the walls seemed far too big, but once Harper cut out a fairy-sized door, the box suddenly felt just right.
Ho, ho, ho!
Then she went to work building everything a Tooth Fairy could possibly need inside her room. For the first item on Harper's list, she built a tower out of Legos and set her tooth on top. Next came the alarm system. But Harper had already dreamed away to a faraway land where trolls hid under bridges, and trolls were very, very afraid of footprints. First, she checked the bell. Was it tied? Yes. So the window hadn't been opened.
Ho, ho, ho!
Next, she looked at the showbox. Was it empty? Oh, no. But then she noticed something strange. Was that a tiny shimmer on the floor? She rushed to investigate. And sure enough, there were sparkles. Hundreds of them. They formed a shimmering path from the window to her bedside table. But the strangest thing was that these sparkles had stuck to the floor. They didn't seem to want to come off. So Harper decided to take a closer look.
Ho, ho, ho!
So Dad simply smiled and said, "Dreams are the best adventures." She chose the bells from her wind chime and hung them from the window using red yarn. It would go jingle whenever the window opened, just like when Mommy opened the window to hang the laundry. To lure the tooth fairy in, she placed a small plate of raspberries next to the door. Raspberries were the absolute favorite food of fairies, according to all the books.
Ho, ho, ho!
So it was almost certain the tooth fairy wouldn't be able to resist eating one. And finally, she put together a cozy lounge area for the tooth fairy to relax in. She scrunched up a piece of paper towel and made a tiny chair out of it. And instead of a sofa, she put out a bottle cap filled with water, because every fairy loved nothing more than sitting in a shallow pool of water while enjoying the night breeze. Let's begin.
Ho, ho, ho!
The tooth fairy was real, but what did she look like? It was a question that plagued young Harper ever since she learned about the tooth fairy. All she needed was one tooth and a fairy trap. That afternoon Harper sat in her room trying to write down all the things a fairy might do, so she could predict which way the fairy would fly. But before she could finish her list, something wonderful happened.
Ho, ho, ho!
While she was chewing an apple, her wobbly tooth popped out and fell onto the floor with a clatter. Well, now all she needed was a good trap. She had read all the books on fairies, and each picture of the tooth fairy was different. In one book, she had rainbow wings, and in another she had sparkly purple wings. One had green hair and a flower behind her ear.
Ho, ho, ho!
Another looked like a tiny ballerina. And then there were the dragonflies, pixies, moths, and just plain ugly fairies. But none of them could possibly look like a bee because bees weren't magical. They buzzed and stung and only showed up when you ate watermelon in the summer. Or were they magical? No. Bees couldn't be magical. They didn't leave sparkling trails behind. They didn't visit children at night, and they definitely didn't fly backwards.
Ho, ho, ho!
Because bees flew forwards, just like everything else in life. And so Harper would never know what the tooth fairy really looked like unless she caught her. And she had the perfect plan. That's when she remembered the showbox in the closet. Not just any showbox. But then Harper stopped. Was that really true? She ran over to her bookshelf, grabbed a few dominoes, tied a string to the last one, and stretched it all the way to the door.
Ho, ho, ho!
Just as the minutes ticked by, Harper started to get sleepy. When her dad came to tuck her in, he saw her showbox and asked, "What's that?" In the morning, Harper woke up early. She hopped out of bed and practically flew to the showbox. Had the tooth fairy been here? Carefully, she crawled onto the floor and gasped. Right before her eyes were two tiny, sparkling footprints that walked around the sticky glitter patches on the floor.
Ho, ho, ho!
"My dearest Harper," this is what it said. "I've heard tales of your kindness and compassion. I'm sure they're true." Harper's jaw dropped. "Thank you for watching today."
Ho, ho, ho!